Hi, welcome to Speaking Through the Fog. This is Miranda. I'm going to be doing the last segment of the flotation experience. I didn't know that it was going to be 3 segments long, but I don't want to cut out any of the information. So I got kind of the beforehand information out there. I got during your experience in the pod, and now I'm going to go over what happens after you get out. So after you've had your weird experience in the pod, you might get some hallucinations. I'll talk a little bit about that. And you're probably feeling really good. You might have fell asleep. You might have not fallen asleep, or did I? You're not entirely sure. But usually when I get out of the pod, no matter what, I'm feeling kind of rubbery and dazed and relaxed. I have a hard time figuring out my clothes. I still have a hard time figuring out time. It just is this crazy different experience when you get out, because you just basically put your body in a different state of mind. They found that people actually lengthen their height an inch when they get out, because they become so relaxed and their muscles become so relaxed. They actually are going to their full height potential and not like all tightened up and in a ball. And you usually have an afterglow, quote unquote, of increased dopamine and endorphins that can last for days afterwards. So almost like having sex and you're done, and that's kind of the feeling, or like doing a lot of drugs right afterwards. Not saying you should do a lot of drugs, but that's the reason people continue doing them. This is a lot healthier than drugs, so please become addicted to floating. Um, so I want to talk a little bit about endorphins. I promised earlier I would. So endorphins, again, are the brain's happy chemical. It's the chemical that everybody wants. And opiates like morphine and heroin actually are just synthesized endorphins that last longer in the endorphin receptors. So when it absorbs into your system, you have little receptors for the chemical, and when it goes in there, it tells your body information. So it's telling you, okay, this feels good, and you're happy. And so you naturally produce endorphins. But things like morphine go in. Well, okay, so with endorphins, they almost right away, when they go in there, they absorb and go away. Now, morphine will come in, or any kind of opiate, and stay in there and continue telling it it feels good, it feels good, it feels good. And that's why also you get used to it, because it stays in there so long. The receptor's like, okay, whatever, dude, you're just continuously telling me this. So then you got to take more and more and more. So that's why endorphins also are not addictive, but opiates are. And so that's kind of a basic explanation as to endorphins. They aid memory, actually. Endorphins don't just make you feel good, they do other things in the body. Placebos are actually aided by endorphins, because when you take a placebo, you release a really big thing of, or a big um, you have a big endorphin release, basically, because your body's expecting it to feel good. And so that's how placebos work. UV light and body work can create endorphins, and floating can as well. Stress and pain can trigger endorphins, because it's like trying to uh, get you to feel better. And also, if you're stressed all the time, it keeps releasing endorphins, and then your body's not as able to release them. So floating can reduce your stress and therefore make you better able to produce endorphins again. Um, Emotions and motivation are affected by endorphins. Motivation, because you want to get endorphins. So if something makes you feel good, you're going to do it again. Satiation, being sated, knowing when to say when, is affected by endorphins. So when you eat a big meal at the end when you don't feel like you want anymore, that's because they've released endorphins, and endorphins are telling your body, you're happy, you're good, you don't need anymore. And they aid in memory because of this. They also deal with extra pyramidal motor function, so steadiness. People have low endorphins when they have like Parkinson's disease and they're shaking. It affects your ability to stay still and not start moving. It also helps with heart and water balance. So going into float will help all of these by throwing out endorphins. Now, dopamine is the brain's pay attention chemical. So it's not a feel good drug. I think I mentioned that earlier. It's most people think dopamine is like endorphins. It's not. It's released in good times, like in the tank or when you're having sex, and it's bad times too, like during war. Um, if you get bitten and by a dog or something, and what it is salience. It's the way your brain releases this dopamine when it wants to say, hey, this is really important. You need to pay attention so we can either do it again because it feels really good, or we need to pay attention so we know how to avoid it next time. So it's the brain's chemical way of saying that. Dopamine also controls movement. It's how movement gets started. It's the chemical message that gets released when you start moving. Food, love, and sex release dopamine. Again, pay attention, this is awesome, or pay attention, this is really gross. It helps information flow through the brain, so dopamine aids that. It's released to help suppress the feeling of nausea and vomiting, or create the feeling of nausea or vomiting. It helps kidney function, cardiovascular function. It also gives you memory, sleep, pleasure, because it rewards pleasure, behavior, cognition, attention, sleep, mood, learning, motivation, sodium removal, insulin reduction, prolactin, which is the chemical that stops breastfeeding. They're all affected by dopamine. So dopamine is a really important chemical. Too little or too much is too bad. So you go, it's great, right? So we should be releasing it all the time. No, not necessarily. Dopamine needs balance. Too much or too little dopamine can cause pain, loss of attention, loss of prioritizing, and it can also create depression. Too much causes sexual promiscuity, impulsiveness, disordered thoughts, delusions, and it can even cause psychosis. So schizophrenics have lots of dopamine. So you're thinking, well, you just said that you go into a tank and it releases dopamine. Well, it doesn't release a dangerous level of dopamine. It just releases enough to start your homeostasis, get your dopamine flowing in the correct way. So just like when you exercise or you train your body to release endorphins, it does so more often. So you start exercising and you get that endorphin high. Next time you do something that endorphins release, it does it sooner, because it's like exercising a muscle. Endorphins start coming easier and easier. So the more you float, the happier you are, and the longer you can go in between sessions, because it starts to get to where you don't really need it to help you with endorphins. So the amygdala is actually what affects the stress levels, and it actually shuts down the stress center post-float in the same way that lorazepam does. So floating is actually the natural lorazepam. And if you take that, then you can float and do that instead. Floating 3 times a week can cut out the necessity for pain medications, because you're getting that endorphin rush. It also affects the hypothalamus's limbic system, which affects moods, emotions, autonomic function, and the mind-body relationships. So it helps you with all of those functions. the neocortex is affected, and this is a part of brain that handles memory, judgment, and intellect. So studies have shown that all of these different parts of the brain are affected, and they create helps facilitate the new connections between these in the brain, because you're giving yourself enough time away from different uh, stimulation from sensory input, it giving your brain enough time to focus on making these connections. They've actually seen that floating is pretty good for people who've had strokes and need to rewire their brain. A float session is equivalent to taking ginkgo biloba, coenzyme Q10, so CoQ10 if you've ever heard of it, lipoic acid, and all at the same time, or creatine all at the same time in just one session. And floating just gives you a chance to, by getting rid of normal worries, they can like gravity and brain processing, and to get back to homeostasis, it gives you a healthier system overall. So instead of focusing on one, my shoulder hurts, my knee hurts, I'm anxious, you're helping your whole body get back to normal, which will help everything else. And this is the unified theory of floating. So basically why floating is so good. Now, magnesium, which you get through the salt because you're getting so much salt at once, it's really awesome chemical. And the magnesium and theta and relaxing your muscles help you sleep better, which can last for days or weeks after you float. Magnesium is primarily found in is 60% of our skeleton. 80% of our population has a magnesium deficit. Stress can make magnesium not absorb correctly. It's the number one vitamin deficiency. It helps relax the muscles in your stomach and calm the acids, and so it can actually help prevent stomach issues. It helps regulate calcium, vitamin D, copper, and zinc, which helps build bones, muscles, your teeth. It helps regulate breathing. It helps bladder control and fighting infections. It's a muscle relaxant, so it helps period cramps and headaches and any little muscle twinges you have. It stops the chemical that's released that tells your nerves that they're in pain. It also helps prevent the causes of heart disease, and it helps aid the release of insulin to help control blood sugar. So magnesium is really, really cool, and you get a lot of it while you're floating. 12 sessions of floating relieves pain in 70 different people, and it lasted for 4 months afterwards, so it's long lasting as well. And they're using it in sports now because people can visualize what they want to do in the theta state, and it actually does as good as practicing once or twice more a week. It also helps people with PTSD because it decreases your anxiety, boosts your endorphins, and helps you sleep. So they are just finding all this crazy cool stuff about floating, and I know it helped me. I've started floating probably 3 or 4 times a week, and I'm really crazy about it right now, and I'll probably back off of it, but I've been talking better. I walked out of my first session not saying ugh, and I've got actual energy now. So float if you want, float if you don't. I've just given you an option. So this is Speaking Through the Fog, and I will be talking a little bit about medicine next time and start going through the history of how medicine came to be what it is today. So like my videos, like my blog, go to my website, and I will talk to you guys next time on Speaking Through the Fog.